Thanks to you at home as well for staying with us this hour. The President of the United States flying about the country and making public appearances. That is always kind of the fulcrum around which the rest of the day's political news tilts. And that was largely true today with the president in Colorado and then heading to California. But there was also big substantive news today from the new Secretary of Defense, from Chuck Hagel, who gave the first big policy speech of his time in office. Chuck Hagel talked about the military being an essential tool of American power, but one that must only be used with a keen appreciation of its limits. That kind of talk drives nuts all the hawks who want wars everywhere. So prepare for a neocon meltdown about this speech in 3, 2, 1. Also today in Afghanistan, a Taliban attack on mostly civilians in a western part of the country had a huge death toll, at least 53 people killed. Now, remarkably, that is a death toll that was not achieved thanks to some individual huge bomb blast. It wasn't one giant explosion that they killed 53 people with. They killed 53 people in a raid just with guns. A stunning toll in that Taliban attack today in western Afghanistan, in a province that borders Iran. In domestic politics here at home today, President Obama announced that he will give back 5% of his own presidential salary. He'll give back 5% of his salary for the rest of the year in solidarity with the other people who are being laid off in the government and furloughed because of the sequester. Today, also in Tennessee, on this eve of the 45th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King being assassinated, the Shelby County, Tennessee Recorder's Office today, look at this video. It released a bunch of videos that have never before been seen. Videos showing James Earl Ray after he was arrested for Dr. King's murder. The tapes include, and I will admit that this is kind of weird, the tapes include, strangely, the whole very long, detailed process of James Earl Ray being strip searched as he's brought into the jail, as indicated by the pixelation work that you see here. So there was lots going on in today's news. Good, bad, and really quite unexpectedly revealing and weird. But we start tonight's show with Second Amendment remedies. In the midterm elections in 2010, Nevada Republicans nominated a woman named Sharon Engel to run for Senate in Nevada. Sharon Engel was going to try to unseat Harry Reid in Nevada. Sharon Engel was a very fashionable type of candidate for Republicans that year. She was anti-establishment, Tea Party endorsed, super conservative. And this race in Nevada was supposed to be a cakewalk. Harry Reid's numbers were really bad. Everybody expected Harry Reid to lose his job. Everybody knew that the 2010 election was going very Republican overall, and Harry Reid was seen as the most vulnerable senator on the Democratic side. Sharon Engel could not lose this race. Sharon Engel lost that race. And pinpointing exactly where her platform went wrong and exactly how her behavior as a candidate may have cost her that election, frankly, it's impossible to pinpoint it even in retrospect, because with her campaign, the where did I go wrong possibilities are limitless possibilities. I mean, was it when Sharon Engel proposed that the basis for U.S. currency should be metals and oils? Was it her position that even having a Department of Education is a violation of the Constitution? Was it her professed hatred for fluoride? It's hard to say, really. But this did not help.
Thomas Jefferson said it's good for a country to have a revolution every 20 years. I hope that's not where we're going. But, you know, if this Congress keeps going the way it is, people are really looking toward those Second Amendment remedies. They're saying, my goodness, what can we do to turn this country around? And I'll tell you, the first thing we need to do is take Harry Reid out.
Second Amendment remedies. Second Amendment as in Second Amendment. Americans are going to shoot our way out of the political problems that we have with the Congress. And that wasn't just a one-off, unfortunate turn of phrase that she said in that one interview. This was a big part of her campaign. She said this stuff all the time. For example, she told the Reno Gazette-Journal in May of that year, quote, "The nation is arming. What are they arming for if it isn't that they are so distrustful with their government? They're afraid they will have to fight for their liberty in more Second Amendment kinds of ways." That's why I look at this as almost an imperative. If we don't win at the ballot box, what will be the next step? So that's how she explained why she was running against Harry Reid, why she thought it was imperative that she unseat Harry Reid in the United States Senate. Because if Americans with guns did not succeed in voting Harry Reid out of office, they would turn to another way of doing it. They would use their guns to get their way instead. Nevada was not amused. In a race that was hers to lose, in a race where Democrats lost all over the country, Sharon Engel is the one who lost and Harry Reid won. With all her talk about her supporters and conservatives more broadly getting their way in this country by using weapons to get what they couldn't win through the democratic process, Nevada decided to take a pass on old Sharon Engel. Her Second Amendment remedies thing turned out to be a failing argument in 2010. 2010 was also the year when some people who were angered by the passage of Obamacare decided to organize retaliation and resistance against those votes in Congress in the form of rocks thrown through the windows of Democratic Party offices. Those incidents included an incident at Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Gifford's office in Tucson. Just hours after the vote on Obamacare, somebody smashed a window and door at her office, either by kicking it or by shooting at it. That violence, those acts of intimidation, also did not work in the end. We got Obamacare. We got the dreaded tyranny of private health insurance for people with pre-existing conditions. But the people who made those threats and committed those acts of intimidation to try to influence a big national public policy debate we were having in this country about health care, their intention was to use that intimidation to get their way in our political process, but obviously it failed. Of course it failed. You do not get far in this country using tactics like that. It is a tactic, and it recurs in different debates at different times, but it doesn't work. It's not a tactic that works in this country for a good reason. We do not settle political arguments by physical force of arms. Not since, an important time in the 1860s. And the ones who had the idea to take up arms then, too, were the ones who lost that last fight. Yesterday, the NRA unveiled a 225-page report about school safety. What was notable about their big presentation was not the content, Cliff Notes version, more guns make everything better, obviously. What was notable and interesting about the unveiling of their report was how they handled the logistics of the unveiling at the National Press Club. You know when you turn on C-SPAN and there's somebody talking about public policy or a book about public policy and it looks really very nerdy in that awesome nerdy C-SPAN way? A lot of the time, part of the visual nerd charm of what you're looking at on C-SPAN is because the people on C-SPAN are speaking at a place called the National Press Club. The National Press Club does a lot of events that are, the unveiling of reports and stuff. And as the place's name implies, the National Press Club is a club for the press. So people go there to talk about their thing, and they invite reporters and photographers. They invite questions. They take questions on this thing, and they get press coverage for it. That's the way it works. That's the whole point of this place existing. Except yesterday, when the NRA decided to unveil their school safety report, they decided that they would unveil it at the National Press Club, but only in the presence of 20 or so ostentatiously armed men. Armed guards to protect their presenter when he presented his findings to a room full of notepad-wielding reporters at the National Press Club. According to the Washington Post, the NRA supplied roughly one armed guard for every 3 reporters. Some of the guards had their weapons plainly exposed. Others just had obvious bulges under their suit jackets. Quote, "It was a spectacle the likes of which the people who work at the National Press Club had never seen before." Quoting from the Post, the NRA gunmen directed some photographers not to take pictures, ordered reporters out of the lobby when NRA officials passed, and inspected reporters' briefcases before granting them access to the news conference. There were so many armed men guarding the NRA guy from the press that he had asked to be there at the National Press Club. There were so many armed men in the room. It was such an impressive presence that the NRA guy had to try to explain to the reporters what all the guys with guns were actually doing there.
Well, if you go into a mall, there's security, and so there's security here at the National Press Club.
Mr. Hudson, just
yes.
to build on Wendy's question, though, we don't see this level of security for events at the press club.
We come here a lot.
Afraid of.
No, there's nothing I'm afraid of. I'm very wide open. There's nothing I'm nervous about.
There's nothing I'm nervous about. After the big speech, as everybody was shuffling out of the room, there was what kind of sounded like a kerfuffle. And although you could not see on camera exactly what was going on, you could definitely hear it clearly.
And this is the press club, he's the press. Sir, this is the press club and he's the press. He can do that. It's what we do here with the cameras.
It's what we do here with cameras. This is the press club. He's the press. Somebody there presumably explaining to all the Second Amendment guys that there's another amendment called the First Amendment, too. It's short. You can read it. This big show of how many guns the NRA could pack into the National Press Club is not an accident, right? This is one of their political tactics. It's an intimidation tactic. It's a show of force. Last week at one of the events marking the big National Day of Action for people who were calling for gun reform in the states, a group of people showed up to counter-protest in Indiana. They counter-protested a group of moms who was protesting for gun reform. And these guys were protesting in favor of gun rights instead. You can tell who the counter-protesters were because they were the ones showing off their loaded weapons, circling around the moms group that had turned out to call for gun reform. Now, I can't tell from looking at a guy doing this if his weapon is loaded or not, but they told us to believe that the guns were loaded. The guys carrying these guns told the press, yes, these guns are loaded. Quote, any weapon that is not loaded is just a rock or a club. A reporter then said to the men, which means this is loaded? The answer, yes. You know what? It is intimidating to be in the presence of a loaded AR-15 assault rifle, especially when it is not held by, say, an instructor on a range or, say, a cop or somebody else who's there to ensure your safety, but instead is just held by a guy who is holding that rifle specifically because he believes it will help him win his political disagreement with you. You see how that could be intimidating. If you believe that our nation's gun laws are too restrictive, if you want more guns everywhere, especially around our nation's school children, you are free to make that argument. You are free to protest. You are free to be rude in your protest. You are free to be uncouth. You are free to do anything you think will help you win the argument. Our protections on freedom of speech are designed specifically to protect obnoxious speech. Nice speech doesn't often get suppressed, so it doesn't need protection. But let the record show at the same time that in the United States, whether the issue is guns or anything else, you will not win arguments that you try to win by threatening to shoot your opponents. You will not win if the way you are trying to win is by threatening to use weapons to get your political way. People do it in this country. It is a tactic. People try it from time to time, and they lose. Because Americans do not settle disputes that way. In fact, we're pretty invested in having a political system that has us not settling disputes that way. Once you threaten that you are going to settle your political disputes by use of arms, you will lose all of your political disputes. Tempting as it may be, particularly when the issue is guns itself, threats and physical intimidation are not how we successfully achieve change in this country. This is.
Hi, I'm Dylan Hopkins. Pleased to know you came to support the strongest cause possible.
You said you just, my heart just goes out to you folks. Just, what can you say?
I am just a mom who lost her son, and every day is challenging, but if I can do something to help save lives of other children or other adults and help other moms not go through this, then I have an obligation to do that, and so I will do it.
Have you found that your voice is being heard here by the lawmakers?
They're listening to us without a doubt. What that ultimately means we'll find out this week, but they have been very open to conversation and civilized, healthy debate.
Shortly before 7 p.m. tonight, in a bipartisan vote that was not close, the Connecticut Senate passed a broad package of gun reform legislation. It includes an expansion of that state's assault weapons ban, background checks on all gun purchases, a ban on the sale of high-capacity magazines, and a requirement that you have to be certified the way a gun owner is if you want to buy ammunition for a gun. This thing is through the Senate now. It is now being debated right this second in the Connecticut House, where it is also expected to pass. Pro-gun protesters flooded the state capitol this morning chanting, "Just say no." They used their right to protest, they raised their voices, and they lost this particular side of the debate. It's the way this country works. You make your case, sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose. And that is the way that it worked in Connecticut today with this bipartisan, huge vote. Bipartisan overhaul of that state's gun laws following the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School, which of course is in Connecticut, back in December. Today, President Obama traveled to Colorado, a state that itself passed a broad set of new gun safety legislation last month. The president today in Colorado talked about what has been the central part of gun legislation that he would like to see passed at the federal level, the issue of universal background checks for all gun purchases. It's newly the law in Colorado and New York State. It's soon to be newly the law in Connecticut. The president today repeatedly pointing out that more Americans agree with Colorado and New York and Connecticut on that issue of universal background checks than Americans agree on almost anything else.
These enhanced background checks won't stop all gun crimes, but they will certainly help prevent some. This is common sense. And by the way, most gun owners, more than 80%, agree this makes sense. More than 70% of NRA members agree. 90% of the American people agree. So there's no reason we can't do this unless politics is getting in the way. There's no reason we can't do this.
Public opinion is on the side of change on this issue overwhelmingly. Overwhelmingly. The contingent of the public, the minority even among NRA members who do not want change on this issue, people who have decided that a background check is not tyranny at a gun store, but it is tyranny at a gun show for some reason, they, of course, get to say that and try to explain that as much as they want to. But their ability to be heard in debate stops when they turn to intimidation instead of persuasion. Nobody can hear what you're saying when you are shadowing a peaceful mom protest with a loaded assault rifle. Your effort to intimidate drowns out your own words. It's not how we do things in this country. Connecticut's governor joins us next.